This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. Just when I wondered if anyone was listening.
James Hetfield from Metallica. You've come all the way from LA just to see a live jam of Feedback with Roger Bolton.
Dead ringers. Nice to get a mention. This is the real Roger Bolton, I'm afraid, for good or ill, and we are often in a jam. But in this week's programme, my joy is unconfined as I get to meet the woman who dominated my adolescent dreams. She is, of course, Carol Tregoran, who has returned to Ambridge after a long absence. But for how long?
I might fall off a roof. It's terribly funny. It's almost like a 0 hours contract in my mind.
Eleanor Bron, alias Carol Tregoran. Please don't climb up any ladders. Also in this week's feedback, as Alex Salmond and Alistair Darling battle it out in the Scottish independence debate, I've been to Glasgow to see if anyone has attempted to shoot the messenger, or at least accuse the BBC journalists there of bias.
It's quite a trick to pull off in Scotland, to be fair and in the middle of a debate which is essentially about altering Britain.
But we begin with the anniversary of the outbreak of the First World War 100 years ago. There have, of course, been programmes commemorating that catastrophic event since the beginning of 2014, but this week was perhaps the most important anniversary, August the 4th being 100 years to the day since Britain declared war on Germany. Many of you found the BBC's coverage both sensitive and moving.
My name is Nora O'Donoghue. I just wanted to congratulate everybody who took part in the two ceremonies on the anniversary, the 4th of August.
Welcome to Glasgow Cathedral, where in the next few minutes the fervour and excitement of the Commonwealth Games that have so energised the city will be transformed into an hour of commemoration and reflection.
I thought everything was done so beautifully. Thank you.
I'm Iris Clyde from Orkney. I found it very moving. The young girl who visited the war graves, a 16-year-old, how it had affected her.
As I laid my poppy upon the headstone of my soldier and gazed out over the never-ending ripples of white stones, I suddenly felt so small.
Hi, this is Sue Davis. I'm calling from Telford in Shropshire. I was very moved by Paddy Green, alias Jill Archer's reading The Archers. The feeling that she put into it was incredible.
Our limbs, so dear achieved, our sides full-nerved, still warm, too hard to stir.
The service that they acted out was absolutely first-rate.
Others were not so impressed by the quality of the coverage.
My name's Carolyn Simpson. I'm from Hornchurch in Essex. I felt that the Radio 4 coverage was appallingly jingoistic. It just seemed to be celebrating the appalling loss of life, and there has been little or no mention of the thousands of people who were against the war being declared in the first place.
I'm Wendy Hawkins and I'm from Bristol. A lot of the coverage has been about the people who died, and whilst that is extremely valid, lots of men fought in the First World War and were injured or didn't die. And my granddad was one of them. We talk about people who died, but we should be talking more specifically about the people who fought.
I'm Maria Gayton. We've only actually come just now to the anniversary of Britain's involvement in the war, and already there's been a huge amount of coverage.
And on the centenary of the outbreak of World War I, how did it shape British farming?
I'm David Eads with a special edition of The World Tonight at the Imperial War Museum.
There's still a full 4 years of the history of the conflict to go, and I think to do that we need to scale back now. It just won't be sustainable.
Do you agree? Do you think there is anything left to say about that dreadful conflict? Please let's have your emails, tweets and letters. Now, no sooner had Glasgow's Commonwealth Games come to an end than another competition resumed, with much more at stake than medals, whether Scotland is to remain part of the United Kingdom. The referendum asking should Scotland be an independent country takes place in less than 6 weeks' time on September the 18th. On Tuesday, the first televised debate took place in Glasgow between Alex Salmond, leader of the Yes campaign for independence, and Alistair Darling, backing the Better Together campaign, which wants a no vote. The televised debate was shown only in Scotland on the commercial broadcaster STV, but it dominated BBC News programmes both before and after. How are the journalists coping with the long campaign, which could result in the end not just of the Union, but of the British Broadcasting Corporation in Scotland? I went to the BBC's Glasgow headquarters and joined Scotland correspondent Colin Blaine as he was sending a report to the newsroom in London.
And hi traffic, it's Colin Blaine in Glasgow. Can you hear me? If you are recording, I'll give you a few words for level. Well, it's promising to be a busy day because I'm trying to set up an item for the PM programme, which goes out at 5. I'm going to have a built item for the 6 o'clock news. So we'll do something for the bulletin, for World Tonight, for the midnight, and then I'll be doing the morning summaries and bulletins as well.
When the referendum campaign started, what did listeners want to know from you?
I think one of the things that perhaps we all thought is that we would be able to elicit answers. We'll be able to find answers to some of the hard questions about things like the currency, about EU membership, perhaps about pensions, all of those things. But it's been very difficult, partly because the two sides are not negotiating in advance. There are a lot of unknowns, a lot of unanswered questions, and that's a little bit unsatisfactory for a journalist not to be able to say, well, we think this is what you can look forward to.
BBC reporters are not supposed to express opinions on such controversial matters, but are they giving the audience the information it needs and wants? The BBC special correspondent Alan Little may be more familiar to you for his reports from around the world, but when the referendum was announced, he asked his BBC bosses if he could take a break from foreign assignments for a while and report the events happening in his home country, Scotland.
You have to pitch all of your reports to two distinct audiences. The audience that's listening in Scotland and the audience that's listening everywhere else in the United Kingdom. Because Scotland has been living with this issue all my adult life. Really, the rest of the country woke up to it, I think, really only this year, in the course of this year, and came to understand the weight of the decision, which is whether or not the United Kingdom continues to exist as a single state or not.
Now, you obviously hear from the politicians, particularly if they disagree with something you said. Do you hear from the audience? Do they get in contact and say, we want to hear more about this, or we're fed up with that?
The thing you hear most often from people, because we go out every day and talk to people who are going to be voting, and they say, I need more facts. Well, unfortunately, there aren't really any facts. There are simply assertions. One of the things that demonstrates this most comprehensively was the day that both sides issued their economic forecast papers. We all know that economic forecasting a year ahead is unreliable, and I think people have become suspicious of both sides. They find it very difficult to accept that there are no facts to be had. There are simply assertions and judgments, and at the end they've got to choose which future they prefer or trust the most.
Someone who knows how much real interest there is in the referendum from the listeners is Louise White, the presenter of BBC Radio Scotland's phone-in programme Morning Call.
Coming up, do we need to pay top salaries to get the best people running your council? And
I joined her just after she'd come off air.
I think that we are absolutely hungry for this topic and for this debate. It is a unique event for our country, and I think we never underestimate our listeners out there.
How do you avoid being overwhelmed by people who are partisan groups who've been told, listen, the moment that debate's over, you get on the air and tell people our team won? You'll get some of that tomorrow, won't you?
Yeah, we probably will, but you know what? I have the easy job. I just do the talking bit. The real responsibility is with my production team. Do I say we screen our calls? Perhaps that's too strong a word. We certainly ask all our callers, do you mind telling us how you're planning on voting? They're under no obligation to tell us, but nevertheless we ask the question, and we try very hard to maintain that balance.
In the newsroom at Pacific Quay in Glasgow, BBC journalists are filing stories for the audiences in Scotland and across the UK. Brian Taylor is BBC Scotland's political editor. He is the man whom the campaigners lobby, flatter, cajole and complain to about the coverage. And the audience often gives him a piece of their mind as well. Earlier this year there were allegations of bias, particularly from supporters of the Yes campaign, who accused the BBC of often favouring the other side.
There is pressure from both sides. All sides, political parties, they're seeking favourable coverage. It's understandable that they would seek to apply pressure to news organisations more generally, and in the case of the BBC, probably the most significant
news organisation. They had a demonstration outside this building, didn't they?
A number of people had a demonstration outside the building. There will be others who will feel that we, give an even shake. There will be others who will feel that we give too much to the other side. I am confident in myself that the BBC coverage has been scrupulously neutral, has been fair, has been impartial, and has been completely unbiased. I have never, for a scintilla of a second, had it suggested to me that coverage might be tailored in a particular way to suit a particular agenda. It doesn't happen.
If people say, what are one of the things that unites the United Kingdom, or makes you feel proud to be British, it's often the BBC. But you can't really let the BBC be an issue, can you?
Broadcasting more generally has been an issue in this campaign, but I don't think that the BBC, in that sense, a participant in an element of that debate, can participate in the debate more widely.
But your own existence...
It would be entirely wrong in those circumstances.
It would be wrong, but your existence depends more directly than most on this vote.
I would question that, because it's the offer from those who support the Union is to say that the BBC would continue in its present form. The offer from those who support independence is to offer a Scottish broadcasting service using the assets of the building in which we're sitting. It is not for me to judge between those competing offers. That is part of the wider offer upon which the people of Scotland must judge.
Alan Little says the significance of the BBC's role in the referendum story is still not fully understood.
In the 1970s, when the SNP first emerged as a serious electoral force, if they were going round the peripheral housing estates of Glasgow saying, vote for the SNP and you'll get an independent Scotland, the likelihood was that the person on the doorstep would say, but I work for something called British Shipbuilders, I work for something called British Steel, they're going to pay my pension one day, you're going to unravel all of that. Those communities were bedrocks of British identity in Scotland, and they've gone. So now what's left of Britishness in Scotland is the royal family, the armed services, the BBC. And now instead of saying I work for British Steel, people say, will I still get Doctor Who? So it has become part of the debate. The future of broadcasting has become part of the debate. And I've met somebody just yesterday who said, I'm not going to vote yes because I think I might lose the BBC.
The pressure is mounting, not just on the people of Scotland to come to a decision, but also on the BBC reporters covering the story in these final weeks leading up to the vote. At work or at home or in the pub, the question is the same. How are you going to vote? Colin Blaine has a standard response.
I never say how I'm going to vote. My wife doesn't know how I'm going to vote. That puts me in a position where whenever I'm accused, as sometimes we are, of favouring one side or the other, I can say, well, you don't know. In fact, my wife doesn't know.
I know you're not going to tell me which way, but have you made your mind up?
I haven't made my mind up, you know. I'm not there yet. It's quite a trick to pull off in Scotland, to be fair and in the middle of a debate which is essentially about altering Britain.
Well, it's ironic, isn't it? Because a person running the Yes campaign is actually the former head of News and Current Affairs here at the BBC.
That's true, but there are people on the other side as well. I mean, the person who is in charge of the Conservative Party in Scotland, the leader, is a former producer and reporter here, Ruth Davidson. And there's a Labour MSP who used to be a producer of our own news team here in Glasgow. So it tells you something about the kind of melting pot that the BBC in Scotland is. We do have all shades of opinion.
Thanks to everyone at the BBC in Glasgow. By the way, the next head-to-head debate is expected to be hosted by the BBC on the 25th of August. Now, this is the last programme of the present series, but we will be back not long after the Scottish referendum. So please do continue to keep in contact, telling us what is right and wrong about BBC radio programmes and policies. You can write to Feedback, PO Box 67234, London SE1P 4AX, or leave a phone message on 03 333 444 544. Standard landline charges apply, but it could cost more on some mobile networks. Or you can send an email to feedback@bbc.co.uk. Or you can tweet us at BBCR4Feedback. All those details are on our website. Now, those of you who still love Longwave may have noticed that the disruption to its services that we warned you about earlier this year has ended. For good? Well, the BBC tells us the essential maintenance is done, the repairs have been completed, and they are issuing a 10-year guarantee.
The major works for the transmitter were completed on the 16th of July, and Radio 4 Longwave is now back to normal operation. We shouldn't need to undertake this level of maintenance for another 10 years, and we're hoping to do the regular upkeep to the masts so that listeners won't notice too much on-air difference.
We look forward to your emails on Longwave maintenance in 2024. Now, this is also a big week for the future of music on the BBC. The Trust has begun its biggest review of radio, looking at how well the corporation's 6 network music radio stations, Radio 1, 1 Extra, 2, 3, 6 Music and the Asian Network, are performing, beginning with a 3-month online public consultation. In other words, they want to hear from you. I caught up with the BBC trustee Bill Matthews, who is jointly leading the review, and asked him, why now?
This is simply business as usual for the BBC Trust. As the governing body of the BBC, we have a duty to monitor the BBC's services, and we do that on a roughly 5-yearly cycle. And we thought this time it would be useful to combine a review of all 6 music radio services.
Well, a lot of our listeners, as you know, older listeners, are very worried that their interests, particularly, say, on Radio 2, might get squeezed out because the BBC is always trying, obviously, to sustain audience levels. Would you be prepared to say, for example, that the size of audience is less important for a network like Radio 2 than the sort of audience? In other words, the job is to cater for minorities as much as it is for majorities.
One of the big challenges for us at the BBC, of course, is to try and serve all audiences, and I think it's hugely important that we at the BBC ensure that there's some part of our output that everyone across the UK finds interesting, relevant. We have some services which are listened to by millions of people, others that are listened to by smaller audiences. One of the things we will talk about through the review, and I'm not going to prejudge at this point, is that trade-off between popularity and size of audience and distinctiveness.
It seems to me you're caught between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, most people in radio think that the budgets for radio programmes are as tight as they can be, and next time, if there has to be a cut, you need to cut a service. On the other hand, last time the BBC tried to cut a service, 6 Music, it was a bit of a disaster, wasn't it?
I think from the BBC Trust perspective, that shows this type of process in operation. I wasn't a trustee at the time, but I think I recall that the executive made a proposal. The BBC Trust consulted. The view of the Trust after that was that it wasn't appropriate to close down that service. And 6 Music, of course, has gone from strength to strength since
it's
then.
More popular than Radio 2 at the moment, the latest figures anyway, and I think a lot of people would be prepared to march on Broadcasting House again if you did propose to cut something. OK, if you want to hear the listeners, how can they get in contact with you?
If your listeners are able to go online, there's a quick route by going to the BBC Trust website, which is bbc.co.uk/BBC Trust. There's a link there to the online survey, and that form is open until the end of October.
But at the end of this process, you won't be saying, well, perhaps we better cut a service. That's something that is, waiting beyond the licence fee and the BBC Charter negotiations.
We're not going into this service review with cutting services as part of the terms of reference, and there are no proposals that certainly I'm aware of to cut music radio services. And that, as you know and as you've expressed earlier, is quite a big decision for the BBC to make.
BBC trustee Bill Matthews. And the details of how to take part in the consultation are on the BBC Trust's website and on the feedback site as well. I have long admired Marcus Brigstock's almost suicidal comic bravery. There is no subject safe from his satire, however sensitive, and he goes where many fear to tread. This week he returned to Radio 4 with a new series of The Briggs Society. Uh-oh, says the website blurb, Marcus Brigstock has been put in charge of a thing. This week the thing was Europe. Well, in charge is a bit of an exaggeration. Marcus was a member of the European Parliament. But was he funny? Feedback listeners are sharply divided.
Good UKIP, ladies and gentle Farage. It's Nigel to be back on BBC Radio UKIP for half a UKIP with some Farage and UKIP as part of the BBC's ongoing commitment to UKIP. I am required by the Charter to Farage UKIP, Nigel UKIP, Immigrant UKIP as often as I UKIP.
Paul Rainbird, Ormskirk, Lancashire. Brilliant. At last the BBC have an enlightened, informative and factual political commentator that speaks his mind. Well done, Marcus.
I'm Liz from Cambridge. I thought he was brilliant, very funny, and it was really nice to hear someone speaking about the EU with some positive spin. It was really good.
I'm David Hammond from Wisbech in Cambridgeshire, and I just wonder when a programme, alleged to be a comedy programme, stops being funny and starts being a party political broadcast on behalf of the European Union party.
You know, UKIP's reductionist, nationalist vision for Britain is based on willfully dishonest simplifications of complex ideas.
It seemed that Marcus wasn't really interested in giving a balanced report.
And by the way, guys, piece of advice. In order to prove you're not racist, again...
And anybody that sort of opposed his view was characterised as just being either a racist or an idiot.
In response, the BBC tells us...
As the title indicates, the BRIC Society is intended to offer a very individual and, of course, comedic take on a broad range of social topics. As well as European politics and immigration in the first programme, over the course of the series, Marcus will be making a personal and humorous examination of varied issues, such as farming and online social media. Radio 4 has a rich history of political satire, and listeners can expect that no politician or party is safe from ridicule.
Marcus Brigstock is not the only returnee to Radio 4's airwaves in recent weeks. A delightfully mature ex-resident of Ambridge came back, and it was headline news.
The actress Eleanor Bron, famous for appearances in films such as Women in Love and Alfie, has joined the cast of The Archers here on Radio 4. She appeared in last night's episode playing Carol Tregoran, a character whose voice...
Carol Tregoran may not be familiar to younger listeners, but elegant, sophisticated, straight-talking Carol was first heard in The Archers in 1954. Think Anne Bancroft in The Graduate, or more recently Helen Mirren in Anything. Anyway, Carol left Ambridge in 1990 when she headed off to Bristol to make a fresh start with her husband John, amid rumours of a dalliance with Jennifer Archer. If he did, how could he? Regular Archers listeners will know that John died recently and wished to be buried in Ambridge. This brought Carol back to the village and back into rivalry with Jennifer.
And then how are things on the farm?
Yes, fine, thank you.
And Brian, how's he? Still got that roving eye of his?
I'm sorry.
Carol was originally played by Anne Cullen, but as she is now not available, the call went out from the producer. Help! I need somebody. Help, not just anybody. Eleanor Bron is certainly not just anybody. She was a BBC satire queen in the early 60s and starred, of course, in the Beatles film Help, and alongside Oliver Reed in Women in Love, and has since had many other well-known roles on stage and screen. I met Eleanor and began by asking if she'd paused for long before accepting the role of Carol Tregoran.
I don't think I paused at all. My agent, very tentatively, she said, "What do you think of The Archers?" And I said, "Oh, wonderful." I was absolutely delighted. I listen, and I'm fascinated by it, and always have been.
And therefore you obviously know who John and Carol Tregoran were.
Well, not that obviously. I was taken more with John Tregoran, who was presented as such a charismatic and attractive figure. I have less memory of Carol, actually, which is probably a good thing.
Well, Carol was my Mrs. Robinson, I have to say. When I was a schoolboy in the north of England, she was so sophisticated. Mind you, I thought you, Eleanor Bron, was so sophisticated too.
You were
but
wrong.
But I idolised Carol, and I was shocked when she married John, and I couldn't understand either why they left Ambridge. Have you found out why they left Ambridge?
No, I haven't asked. The great skill in the way The Archers goes forward is that they tell you very little. I've been given certain background information, enough to kind of exist on. It's as if you're given a little diet of stuff to fill out your imagination of the life. But you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's happened just before. You don't see any other episodes except your own.
So you don't know whether Jennifer actually did have
an
affair with John, and that's why you were so upset by that you said, no, we've got to leave. You don't know anything about the affair?
No.
It may or may not have happened.
It may or may not have happened. And it's amazing, and very true to life.
When you were asked to do the part, did you have to search for the voice? Beryl Reid, the famous actress, used to say, once I've got the shoes, I know I can play the part. What was the key for you in finding the voice of Carol?
None at all. I'm not using another voice. I thought that way madness lies. She's just an ordinary person like myself. So I'm using my own voice. There were enough similarities as outlined by Sean.
Elegant, poised, intelligent, sophisticated.
A classy dresser, actually. She's a bit, I think there's an element of, not malice, but humorous shrewdness and mischief. Which I may have in myself, but I try to suppress.
Now, you're not allowed to tell us any future plot lines, but
I don't know them.
But you could tell us. You could tell us. You are going to be around in Ambridge for some time, aren't you?
I don't know. I might fall off a roof. It's terribly funny. It's almost like a 0 hours contract in my mind, because you really don't know whether you'll ever be used again.
But in terms of the contract that you sign, do you have to agree to not talk at all about the storylines that you're given?
No.
Because you're not sworn to secrecy?
No.
But you'd be in a lot of trouble if, a few days before a programme's broadcast, you let slip to anybody a plotline.
I'd probably fall under a bus. Another thing that amazes me is they do it in such a short time. They have 6 days, over 7 days, to record a whole month's worth of episodes. So it all has to be done very speedily. And that is so impressive to behold. The old hands are so skillful.
When you're actually going to record The Archers, are there moments when, having been an Archers fan listened in the past, you look around and you're slightly surprised by what other people look like? Do you find, whoops, I didn't think you'd look like that?
Yes, absolutely. And their voices are often very unlike what you'd think. That always fascinates me, because your voice is... I had a completely different picture of you.
I've got a very good face for radio. People often tell me. But it is different. I won't embarrass you by asking what you thought I looked like.
I won't embarrass you by telling you.
Thank you. And so how do you see Carol now? Do you see her as someone who has a zest left for life? Or has she been crushed by John's death, do you think?
I've not been told very much about that. I think their relationship may have been a complicated one. I'm looking forward to finding out a little bit more if I'm spared. People tend to treat old people, or what they think of as old people, as they all start to look the same, they all become uniform. And we all forget that they are people, and they have been people, and they carry all that with them. What they lose is echoes, the people who give them back echoes of themselves. I mean, I'm sure that's what Carol is there to do, is to remind Peggy of who she was.
There are some of our listeners, they're called often the Archers addicts, who are perhaps resistant to someone who is well known outside, as you are as a film and stage actress, and of course radio and television, coming and playing a part. And they sometimes think, because I know what you are like outside of the Archers, they may have a little difficulty in accepting you as the character you play within it.
Well, that may be so. It might be so of another person, but I'm not, in my mind, very well known.
Now, you don't know how long you're going to be in Ambridge, but if it was left up to you, would it be a long stay?
Oh, very, very long. I hope to die in harness.
Helen de Braun. And that's it for this series of feedback. I'm off to try and get a job as an extra in The Archers. When we return in early October, Scotland's future will have been decided, the children will be back at school, and the chestnuts will have fallen off the trees. Autumn will be, in Yeats's words, over the long leaves that love us and over the mice in the barley sheaves. I can almost smell the wood smoke in the air. Can't wait. Do keep listening at home or on holiday, and do keep in touch and keep me and the feedback team in work. Goodbye. This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. Just when I wondered if anyone was listening.
James Hetfield from Metallica. You've come all the way from LA just to see a live jam of feedback with Roger Bolton.
Dead ringers. Nice to get a mention. This is the real Roger Bolton, I'm afraid, for good or ill, and we are often in a jam. But in this week's programme, my joy is unconfined as I get to meet the woman who dominated my adolescent dreams. She is, of course, Carol Tregoran, who has returned to Ambridge after a long absence. But for how long?
I might fall off a roof. It's terribly funny. It's almost like a 0 hours contract.
The appalling loss of life, and there has been little or no mention of the thousands of people who were against the war being declared in the first place.
I'm Wendy Hawkins and I'm from Bristol. A lot of the coverage has been about the people who died, and whilst that is extremely valid, lots of men fought in the First World War and were injured or didn't die. And my granddad was one of them. We talk about people who died, but we should be talking more specifically about the people who fought.
I'm Maria Gayton. We've only actually come just now to the anniversary of Britain's involvement in the war, and already there's been a huge amount of coverage.
And on the centenary of the outbreak of World War I, how did it shape British farming?
I'm David Eads.
In my mind.
Eleanor Bron, alias Carol Tregoran. Please don't climb up any ladders. Also in this week's feedback, as Alex Salmond and Alistair Darling battle it out in the Scottish independence debate, I've been to Glasgow to see if anyone has attempted to shoot the messenger, or at least accuse the BBC journalists there of bias.
It's quite a trick to pull off in Scotland, to be fair and in the middle of a debate which is essentially about altering Britain.
But we begin with the anniversary of the outbreak of the First World War 100 years ago. There have, of course, been programmes commemorating that catastrophic event since the beginning of 2014, but this week was perhaps the most important anniversary, August the 4th being 100 years to the day since Britain declared war on Germany. Many of you
soldier and gazed out over the never-ending ripples of white stones. I suddenly felt so small.
Hi, this is Sue Davis. I'm calling from Telford in Shropshire. I was very moved by Paddy Green, alias Jill Archer's reading The Archers. The feeling that she put into it was incredible.
Our limbs, so dear achieved, our sides full nerved, still warm, too hard to stir.
The service that they acted out was absolutely first rate.
Others were not so impressed by the quality of the coverage.
My name's Carolyn Simpson. I'm from Hornchurch in Essex. I felt that the Radio 4 coverage was appallingly jingoistic. It just seemed to be celebrating
found the BBC's coverage both sensitive and moving.
My name is Nora O'Donoghue. I just wanted to congratulate everybody who took part in the two ceremonies on the anniversary, the 4th of August.
Welcome to Glasgow Cathedral, where in the next few minutes the fervour and excitement of the Commonwealth Games that have so energised the city will be transformed into an hour of commemoration and reflection.
I thought everything was done so beautifully. Thank you.
I'm Iris Clyde from Orkney. I found it very moving. The young girl who visited the war graves, a 16-year-old, how it had affected her.
As I laid my poppy upon the headstone of my